It's Erica here. Erica, there you are. Good to see you, sorry. Erica is going to be the host of this. It's Erica Faltous from ServiceNow. Erica has gone above and beyond the call of duty here. She became host of this panel about 24 hours ago, literally. Claire, who's a good friend of Erica's, when she went ill yesterday, got in touch with Erica and said, would you mind stepping in? And she's come in at very short notice to do this. So I'm incredibly grateful to you for this. So perhaps if our other panelists as well, I've emailed you all, but I've not had a chance to meet you all yet. But hopefully, if you'd like to come up, slowly make your way up, and while Erica's coming up to perhaps introduce you to the topic, I will start being AV guy and moving guy.
Thank you for that, Bryan. I've been coming to this event for the past 8 years. I just recently did the math on this since 2016. It's always a highlight for me of the year, and every year Claire does a phenomenal job in running this panel. So I'm going to try and step into some very big shoes right now. Am I coming up here? Is that, yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
There's two handhelds to share.
Yeah, please all come up, sit wherever. I'm also only just meeting this group, so what I will say is, as you each take your seats, maybe you can each take a moment to introduce yourselves, so that we can all learn about you and your roles as well.
I would say before I introduce myself, one thing I loved is that yesterday or the day before we got an email, just being like, by the way, you're sitting in high stools, wear something that's comfortable for you. And that small bit of accessibility and that tiny bit of, just that tiny point makes such a big difference when you're coming to events. So that's just something practical. In terms of who I am, so my name is Sonya Barlow. I am a Pakistani British woman. I have ADHD and chronic migraines. I come from a low social income background, but I've really worked myself up. So maybe I'm middle class now, possibly. I run an inclusion consultancy called the LMF Network. We started in 2018 as a brunch club whilst I worked in technology and felt like a loner. Didn't really have the network and knowledge I needed. Moved it into a business in 2020. We've upskilled over 20,000 people, have the UK's largest mentoring program, and have a 90% success rate. Outside of that, I'm an author, presenter, and content creator. So anything a CEO needs to do right now to get noticed and to be in front of amazing people like yourself. So thank you for having me here.
Thank you, Sonya. That's quite an intro to follow. So hi everyone, my name's Gill Cooke. My pronouns are she, her. I'm an inclusion consultant and associate. I'm self-employed, and I'm an ex-Women in Tech. So I'm one of the statistic of women who has left the tech industry, mainly driven by a lot of reasons, but probably one of those who's moving into the entrepreneur space. I think I saw a quote earlier saying, "I really want to work in a fantastic company, organisation, environment, so I made it myself." So that's a little bit about me. I'm also of menopausal age. So I've got my little notebook in case I forget any stats, so bear with me. Thank you so much.
Hi everyone, I'm Ahmad. I'm the founder and CEO of EmployAbility. We came of age this year, we turned 18. I'm very proud to say that, so we're now adult EmployAbility. EmployAbility is an organisation, it's a consultancy focused on supporting neurodivergent and disabled students and graduates into employment, and then we work with employers to make sure we can help employers to create valued places of working where everybody is accepted and belongs. It's been a challenge, I have to say. When I started doing this 18 years ago, disability was on nobody's radar, and still many organisations think of disability as something very narrow. Sonya spoke about ADHD, neurodivergence falls into that, mental health falls into that. It's huge, and mental health has become even bigger since post-COVID. So our purpose, and we're very unapologetic about this, is to create equity in the workplace and in recruitment. And our beneficiary group we support for free is talented, disabled, neurodivergent students and graduates. We partner with primarily very large tech companies and financial services organisations to really help them to think about what does an inclusive culture look like beyond compliance. And you'll be amazed how many people get it wrong, even in terms of compliance. So that's what we're here to do. We really sort of want to change this space and have people think about this and to be really truly inclusive. Thank you.
Always good at a tech event. I'm great. Hi, my name is Megan Goodwin. I'm the co-founder of The Vision, which is a company that puts together diverse thinking advisory boards for businesses. We deal with small to medium-sized businesses right up to corporates. My background's actually as an entrepreneur in gaming for the last 25 years. I worked on big TV shows like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, Deal or No Deal, Strictly Come Dancing, and developed games that I implemented and developed across the world, which brought me this incredible black book of very different, diverse people from all over the world. So that was part of my thinking. So I'm here as a bit of an entrepreneur that's kind of always worked in tech, but very much on the marketing and commercial side. So, hello.
Brilliant. I mean, thank you all for joining, and wow, what an incredible group of panelists that we have here today as well. So today's panel is all about intersectionality. We're going to go into that in just a minute, but the first thing I want to ask you is, we've heard from Becky and from Jasmine in particular about like this importance of the figures, the diversity that we build within organizations, but taking it from the perspective of inclusion and the environment that is created in the workplace. We talk about inclusion as bringing your whole selves, your authentic selves into work and being embraced for that. Why is that so important? Maybe it's an obvious question, but I think it's worth restating. Yeah, Jill. Sonia, Jill?
So just before you say that, it's a really interesting one, and I think what I would just like to say is that statement of bringing one's authentic self to work is actually a really interesting one. And in the training that I've done, one of the things I just want to make a point of is that actually we don't always want everyone's authentic self at work in the nicest possible way, because some people might come and say, well, I'm a racist, I'm homophobic, this is me, take it or leave it, I'm being my authentic self. So I just wanted to do a caveat around that. And what we talk about is around inclusion is what is appropriateness of one authentic self, but it's about creating an environment where people can be their best and be as successful as they can be. And this is why we talk about equity, etc. So I just wanted to do that caveat around authentic self, especially bearing in mind some of the authenticity that is coming to fruition, especially across the pond.
I think that's a great point, thank you. I think to answer your question, look, from a business standpoint, most of us here work in businesses and run our own businesses or want to start our own businesses. Businesses run on money, money runs on finance, finance runs on cash flow, runs on us having the ability to actually solve a problem and create a solution that works for our customers. By having a diverse set of individuals who are either finding that problem, solving that problem, and selling that problem, ultimately those are three phases of business, you're able to create more innovation, actually 8 times, increase profits by at least 30%, and make sure that people are, higher in their productivity scale. So diversity in all essences, inclusion is good for business. That's like the sentiment of it. So even if personally, and to be controversial, if you don't care about the nuances of it, you care about getting paid, we should all therefore be in a position where we're contributing towards getting paid and paid more. From a perspective of people, exactly to your point, I don't know how many people actually want to bring their authentic selves to work, but definitely bring your authentic work self to work, meaning that you have the relevant skill sets, you're learning, you want to grow, you have the values that you're really enriching, your business is helping you to learn and develop, and you want to do best for your business as your best self. To be frank, I am a Pakistani woman with ADHD. I'm very proud of that now, but when I started my world of tech, it was the businesses who were like, we want to hire you because you are diverse. And I was like, right, let me cash that in. Love that for you, love that for me. We're all winning here. But when I got into the business, you didn't want me to be diverse. You wanted me to conform. And you wanted me to go up the ladder. And actually this like bright, beautiful self where my brain works differently and I have a controversial thought, you weren't really looking for that. You were just looking for someone to put from your marketing because that looks good for potential customers and clients. And so I wanted to bring the authentic self, which is the innovation, which is the brightness, which is the free thinking, but the get your work done hustle, because I'm of Asian background, that's kind of in our blood. Businesses aren't ready for that, and that's okay. As a business owner now, I say bring your authentic self to work, but also be brave enough to put your hand up to set those boundaries. Be brave enough to say you're not having a great day, but this is what we can do to get to a better day. And be brave enough to ask questions where you're in a position where you don't know what you don't know, but you're not scared or in fear of saying that to your employer or the next person. So that for me is really what we think about when we think about equity and inclusion. And that version of authenticity is being authentic is also knowing what you don't know and being brave enough to say, I kind of don't get it, so I want to ask that question.
Great point. Sorry, did you want to add something?
Well, I was just going to add, the stats are actually unbelievable about the autism spectrum, about masking at work. There's something like only 29% of people with autism are employed. And I know that there's all sorts of mental health aspects towards people masking at work. So this whole kind of authentic self, I do get the impression that the dial is moving, but we actually, I know it becomes a bit of a buzzword if you're not careful, but this whole thing of actually certain elements of this are actually superpowers. So I'm working with the organisational psychology department at the University of Surrey, and we're putting together some research based on problem solving, and that if you combine sort of neurotypical with ADHD and autism spectrum individuals in a decision-making environment, you literally supercharge innovation because you have the creativity and the empathy on the ADHD. It sounds like a recipe book, actually. You have the kind of logical, structured thought processing and the rigor that goes with autism spectrum. And then you have the neurotypical to be able to potentially facilitate the conversation and to get everybody talking on the same language. So it's kind of incredible where we're getting to. I do think that people are beginning to realize this a lot more.
So yeah, look, I'm going to comment, and I think that I'm going to say some bits that are quite controversial here, which is just from our experience of working with people with neurodivergence, autism, ADHD, different disabilities. These things have become buzzwords, you're quite right. And so a few years ago, autism was in trend. Every company wanted to hire somebody with autism. Every company, tech companies typically, wanted to hire engineers. There were roles out there by large organizations saying, oh, we've got this program for autism. Now the buzzword is ADHD. Right, and it keeps shifting slightly. It's everybody wants somebody with ADHD and or autism. But my problem with that is that's great if you happen to be somebody with autism or ADHD who's a software engineer or who's got that particular skill set. And so then there's these programs. But what if you're somebody with a neurodivergence or disability who doesn't want to be a software engineer, right? Who wants to do something entirely different? What happens then? Because these companies aren't looking for those individuals who maybe don't want to fit into the kind of box that's been created for them. So instead, from my perspective, as a company, if you are looking to be inclusive, open up each of your processes, each of your roles, and let the individual make that choice. It's not for you as the company wanting to hire to decide where this person with this particular characteristic should be fitting. And I say that goes across all intersectionality. So I think we have to be really careful with how we label people, what we decide for them in terms of what they're going to be good at, what they're not going to be good at, what they're going to be less good at than somebody else. So I think we have to be very careful with that. So whilst, yes, there might be certain traits, and to your point, and there are for sure for somebody with maybe some people with autism, some people with ADHD, that benefits in a particular way, I think we have to be careful not to pigeonhole them, and I think we also have to give them the opportunity to decide where they want to go, where they want to be, and whether or not it's a superpower. I don't think we can decide for somebody else what is or isn't their superpower. They might feel it's a superpower, they might feel certain aspects of how they're impacted by autism or ADHD is a superpower, and they may also, at the same time, feel that many elements of them are absolutely not superpowers and actually really impact them in a way where they have to mask, that makes them uncomfortable, where they have to appear neurotypical in order to fit in and exhibit their other superpowers in a particular way. So I think we need to be really, really careful with how we use that terminology and what we expect from people who fall into whatever disability neurodivergence they have.
Yeah. So there's a lot to unpack there. You've brought in, neurodivergence as one of these areas of intersectionality. Sonya, you spoke about background, race, ethnicity. I'm Japanese, Egyptian, so another area of my own intersectionality as well. Tell me, let's first try to level set and define intersectionality. So I'm going to ask for a volunteer. This is you are now playing the dictionary, but can I ask for one of you to volunteer? Like, what do you see as the definition of intersectionality?
I think I will kick off, and then I think if my colleagues have something similar or different, that itself is intersectionality, right? So intersectionality in the simplest form is it's when your power and your processes and your purpose collide, but that's like the technical term, right? It was made by a lawyer named Kimberly Crenshaw, and there's a whole thesis behind it. In simple terms, it's the fact that you have so many layers to you that those layers are either going to help you or hinder you, in the simplest term. So everyone here is intersectional because we all have different layers. I'd love to ask you all a question. Hands up if you think you're diverse. Right, well that's not all of you, and that's crazy because all of us are diverse. That's the whole point. Diverse is about differences. Intersectionality are the different layers that we bring to the table. So with all due respect, even if we are, and I'm gonna generalize here, if we all consider ourselves to be 4 women on the panel, that's bringing a level of diversity, but it also means that we're all kind of coming from a female experience. So what other layers do we have that we're bringing to the conversation? So for me, that's really important that we focus on not intersectionality being a gender or genderless issue. It's really about what different experiences do you have. So at the beginning, when I said I'm Pakistani, I have ADHD, I'm British Asian, I worked in tech, I run a business, that is all the different layers I'm bringing because those are different challenges that I face. I not only face issues being a woman, turns out I face women issues being a brown woman. Then I'm a loud brown woman, which no one really likes, you know what I mean? Then I'm ambitious on top of that. And then on top of that, turns out I didn't know I had ADHD. I didn't even know I had chronic migraines, right? And then you have to navigate your space of understanding who you are in a very adult-like present-day form when they're throwing information at you. So you're thinking, oh my gosh, should I be this version of ADHD or this version of woman or this version of woman in tech? But you have to bring all those experiences because the challenges I face as a Pakistani woman talking quite bluntly and openly here are going to be very different to someone who might face if they're Caucasian and if they're Afro-Caribbean or if they're based or they're grown up in wealth. And so in simple terms, it's the different layers that you bring and the different perspectives that you bring to the table, but also your understanding that no one person is the same and so they shouldn't be treated the same.
Thanks, Sonya. I think that's a really good point, actually, and diversity just is a noun, it just means difference. So actually, we are all diverse from each other, we are all unique human beings, and that's really important. And that's why inclusion does include everyone. It's International Men's Day today, and it's not in competition with International Women's Day.
All the men are like, what?
What?
Where's our cookies? What the hell?
We're here to celebrate everyone, and actually it's really important. It's not in competition, it's collaboration, as I think a number of people have mentioned before. But we are all diverse, and what is initially, we all make our immediate judgments by seeing someone. We see someone, so for example, I have a level of privilege. I'm a white woman. I came from a well-educated background. But what you don't know about me when you see me is that I was brought up in a Muslim country. I studied Arabic and Islam, and I also, I have family members who are neurodivergent, so I've learned a lot around that. I lost my mum at a very early age. So there is things that you may not recognise, and of course I absolutely own my privilege, and I own it, and I make the decision to do something good with it. Yeah. So we are all different, we are all intersectional, but what I think the point here is that although we are all different, intersectionality is the additional barriers and challenges that the more different identities that you identify with, the more likely you are to have additional challenges, additional obstacles, probably additional discrimination, abuse, harassment, etc. So actually, the scales are really weighed up against you. And really what we want to talk about is that how do we recognise that and give people and open the doors to more people by recognising that actually they do have more challenges.
Those are great. Megan, I'm going to come to you with a different question if that's okay, but you can layer on to it because I think those are some really great points around how we think about intersectionality. Megan, you talked about the example of one cross-section that sits in neurodivergence, right? And how we can get the supercharged innovation from that. But do you think the tech sector is actually embracing all the layers, or are they thinking about it in one layer of diversity as opposed to the broad section of intersectionality?
Gosh.
Just a light question.
Okay, I would say, well, exactly to your point, it's quite complex, isn't it? So when I was looking at, I wanted to put together like the perfect board because I felt that most boards are pretty full of the same kind of people that are the culture fit, that's all worked at the same companies, they've all done the same jobs, and there's a very particular look and feel. And I kind of am a little bit of a rebel, so I was like, well, what about the anti-culture fit? And I started looking at, like the optimal problem-solving teams, and that's where I got into the kind of the psychology side of it. But actually, what I became aware of is exactly this element of intersectionality, quite hard to say, really does supercharge it in the sense that when people have faced all these barriers, when people have seen other parts of the world, they have different backgrounds, different experiences, they literally blow open all the potential opportunities. That, like, quite simply, it just broadens the lens, right? So your question was, is the tech sector aware of this? I'm not really sure they are. I'm not sure, like you say, it's very, de rigueur to have ADHD. I'm so sorry. That sounds really dismissive. I didn't mean that at all.
Sorry, I'm cashing in on it. Don't worry.
Exactly, go for it. My business partner also has ADHD.
Don't worry about it.
And I actually have quite a lot of neurodiverse elements in my family too. So this is kind of where we are now. But actually, when I was building my boards and building my process, what we looked at exactly how do you layer this to get the optimal scenario, and it does end up with pretty complex pictures. When you're talking about your different elements, you can imagine this is pretty hard from an employer perspective. But I think personally, what I was going to say to the earlier question and hold to now is there's a whole thing here about each individual has a unique lens, and maybe the way for the tech sector to really kind of open their lens on this is to see that actually all elements of different are actually good. So if you create an environment which actually embraces and seeks challenge and seeks change and difference of opinion, that is only going to be positive for your firm. All the stats that everybody's given you today are the more diverse the leadership team, the more revenue you'll generate. But actually, how many companies kind of seek out very different opinions when they're making massive strategic decisions? How many businesses really incentivize people to have a different view and to put their hand up? There was the last lady gave the slide about people feeling empowered to have a different view. The quietest people in the room are the people who are probably, they are most unrepresented. How do you change that? I think that you need a culture shift of difference is good.
All right, so let's talk about the how. I'm going to skip down and go off piste, so to say. But how do you ensure that you've got that right support and that you are finding out the ways to embrace those differences of intersectionality?
I can talk specifically about disability neurodivergence, for example. And by the way, I think if you get it right for disability neurodivergence, you usually get it right for the other diversity strands as well, because I think sometimes disability neurodivergence is one of the most complex strands to actually address. The reason being it's not a homogeneous group of people. There are huge differences. There's different needs. People don't even self-identify under that umbrella necessarily as having shared characteristics in a way that is different, I think, from the other diversity strands. So thinking about it as if you work for a tech company or any company and you fall into having neurodivergence or disability, then, or mental health, then very often 80% of disabilities, and by that, in that including neurodivergence and mental health, are non-visible. So typically what happens is that people aren't going to know unless you tell them. People aren't going to know you need support unless you tell them. And then if there isn't a mechanism through which you can tell somebody in a way that feels safe to you, there isn't a due process that you can follow, it's not highlighted anywhere, who do you talk to? Do you go to HR? Do you go to your line manager? And who's that information going to be shared with? Because that's really personal, private information. So I think one of the really key important things is there a safe, robust accommodations process in place that is well signposted, that people can go to and be comfortable to engage with, knowing that their privacy is going to be protected and that information is only going to be shared with people that need to understand that information in order to provide the correct accommodations that might be needed in the workplace. And I think most companies don't get that right. Because they don't, normally what we hear is, oh, well, they can come and talk to HR or their line manager. But, if I'm a line manager, what am I going to do with that information? Maybe I don't know what support I can offer you. So what do I do with that information? Who do I take that to? So I think a really robust accommodations process is essential to help create that culture. And then, of course, educating your workforce, making sure that people understand how to be supportive of colleagues, how to actually understand why somebody may be behaving differently from that which we expect, or why they might be needing to come into work a little bit later or leave a bit earlier, whatever that looks like for that individual. How can we be supportive? How can we be supportive of the fact that different people can add value in different ways? It might not be obvious to us how they're doing it, but doesn't mean they're not adding value. So I think those sorts of environments, partly it's culture, partly it's processes, and the policies that then back up those processes, I think, are really key.
Yeah, that's brilliant and very tangible in terms of steps that people can take. Do you have anything to add, Jill?
Yeah, so I was just going to say, so first of all, I wish there was a silver bullet, but there actually isn't. So there is no just one solution that will solve this. As we've heard before, there's a lot of collaboration, etc. But I think if I was just to cover a couple of things, so I think a holistic approach is really, really important, and also an intersectional and individual approach. So everyone is different, as we've already spoken about, and you're absolutely right, Tab. If we were to make provisions or reasonable adjustments for one group, if you widen that out to everyone, it will be of benefit to everyone. That could be around sharing interview questions. Now, it's not only going to help those who are neurodivergent, those who are introverts. I get really nervous about interviews. I break down. People who have either got mental health or depression or menopause, for example. So it will help everyone. Like, everyone could do with a little bit of help, because actually, what are you testing? Are you testing someone's memory? Or are you testing their ability to research, to talk, to communicate? So it's not one size fits all, and we can go into the education system, but I think the workplace has a lot more power and control to make changes much more quickly than we can in there. So equitable hiring and progression, inclusive culture, creating inclusive culture through education and training, as you've mentioned, and how can we actively dismantle systemic bias? I think that's absolutely cool.
I might be a little bit controversial here, but I just think, honestly, a lot of it is common sense. And in 2024, the fact that I'm on another panel talking about this, actually, it seems like it's a us problem. Because if it's not getting through to us, then clearly the way we're communicating is not correct, right? If that makes sense. Like, we need to be doing things, or we need different ways of doing things, or different communication channels. If you just take it a step back, it really is about being empathetic. Would you like it if you were in that situation? Okay, if yes, if no, go and ask the relevant questions. Ask people what they want. Ask people how they like to work. A really good example being is when people come into my workspace, we have a cheat sheet. And that cheat sheet is literally small things like, what are your working hours? What should we know about you? What do you not eat? So that when we have events, we can make sure that everyone is catered for. But also, things that we should know about you. A good example being, I run my company, and I still find fear when someone emails me, we need to talk. About what? What do you need to talk about? Are you going to fire me? Like, are you going to make me redundant? Because you have past experiences that come into present day. So it simply says, if you're going to email me a meeting, just put a couple of bullet points of the agenda as to what we're going to go through. When we have any kind of team meeting virtually, we always have now an AI tool that captures the information, and a Google Doc, which is open for 48 hours, just so that you can go and put your notes if you have processing time afterwards. If you have to make a decision, it's not a decision in the moment, it's here's the information we've shared with you, we're going to give you half a day to process it, come back with any questions, but here's the deadline for when we need something done, right? Everything that you can think that just makes our lives easier, amazing. Meetings, between the hours of 10 to 3, that's where your bulk should be, but also companies like Currys, they do a really good no hour, I don't remember the exact word for it and I use it all the time, but for 1 hour a day, they have no noise, no music, even in store. That's great just to help you take breaks because they have so much information overload. I personally have a no laptop day a week and I run a business, which means that I am basically forced to go outside and to go on walks, so I take a lot of walking meetings, which is better for the way you function. And ultimately, it's the small, relevant steps that we can take. I personally don't love the words of right and wrong, because I can see fear in everyone's eyes, sitting here being like, am I getting it right? Am I gonna get cancelled? Is someone gonna call me out? As long as you can showcase what the problem is and the steps that you think you're taking and why it's relevant, and then go and ask for feedback and see if it works. So small, significant steps make a big change. That's a good step in the right direction. If you can have 4 focus areas a year and every quarter have one that you're focusing on, actually document it like you would with any other data and showcase the improvement you've made, that's in the right direction. But if you're going to be like, hey, we're going to have 50% of women on our boards, but actually that means that we have to hire 20 new people in the next year, I would like to understand, are you hiring them because of their gender or because they're the relevant people for that role? Because I'm telling you, from a gender perspective, we don't want jobs for the sake of it. We want it because we've earned that place. So if you're taking a step back to be like, we need to increase the quota, we understand that this is how we're doing it, this is what we'd like to get, but even if you come back and you say we didn't get there, as long as you put the relevant steps in and you're showing progress, that's so important.
Can I just add to that? Sorry. And that's why I think inclusion is more important than diversity. So inclusion creates diversity, and I think in the past people have brought people in, but then people who do have extra needs or are maybe a little bit loud or a little bit this or a little bit that, and they don't fit in and therefore they leave. So if you want people to stay, start with inclusion, start with the inside, and then other people will want to come to the party, if that makes sense.
It opens up my last question I'm going to get to before hopefully maybe we can get 1 or 2 from the audience as well. But when it comes to diversity, we look a lot at the data. So how are we doing on the stats of gender diversity? That becomes one that is easier and more visible to measure than in other areas. How do you think the industry is doing on measuring the data of diversity? Is that necessary? Is, to your point, Gill, is that actually not the first step?
I think sometimes getting the data, depending on what diversity strand we're talking about, can be quite difficult. So yes, maybe if you're looking at gender, it may be a little bit easier. If you're looking at some ethnic minorities, it may be a little bit easier, although not necessarily. If you're looking at disability, really tough, really tough. If we're talking about intersectionality, therefore tough all the way across. So how do we do that? And then companies, again, can often get caught up in the data. Well, we don't have the data, so we can't do anything about it. We can't do anything about it because we don't have the data. It's a chicken egg situation. I'd say that, I mean, you might not have the precise data. We can probably look at your workforce and see, generally speaking, and again, thinking about disability, what I get told, oh, there's nobody with disability who works here because we can't see them. Okay, they're not in a wheelchair, that's true, but that's 5% of people of disability who might be in a wheelchair, so just because you can't see it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Or the other thing I get is, it's okay, we have a ramp. That's great for somebody in a wheelchair. It doesn't help ADHD so much. But so I think, to answer your question, I think data is always important, but I would say what is important to measure is the change that happens because you've implemented something. So try something, do something that is the appropriate thing to do for your particular organisation, maybe putting a new process, whatever that looks like, to create that inclusive culture. I agree with you that will then lead to diversity more organically. and then see what the difference is between where you were at before to where you are now. So I think measuring that incremental difference is really how to measure that success.
That's great, really useful. I'm going to open it up to this group here. Does anybody have a question that they'd like to ask of the panel? Yes.
Hello, my name is Akil, and I'm currently working with a group of female engineers to create a pathway for girls to get into engineering. Yeah, and that's through education, through colleges and universities. So I think it's an area that's not been addressed well. Career advisors are not geared to give that advice to female. They have a perception of engineering being something really dirty and horrible, and I think that's another area that we need to address. So I just wanted to ask the panel, what other things that can be done that could actually improve that pathway?
May I take this? Go for it.
I think it's a really valid question, and I keep on nodding because I'm going to try and simplify this because my brain has loads of ideas right now, but let's take it back. What can everyone in this room do? You can go back to schools and you can give an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours of your time, and you can showcase what your career journey looks like. That is half a day of your year, which everyone has voluntary hours. You can make a significant difference, right? Because storytelling and showcasing people parts is really, really important. Secondly, is you can just sign up as a mentor, and you can do that for young professionals who are part of schemes like ours. Again, a couple of hours a month makes a significant difference. If anything, it helps their career by 80%. The average person in our mentoring program gets an 11K pay rise. So that's like 2 things you can do, and we should all be accountable for. To your point, we actually did an event with British Airways in 2020, where, exactly to your point, we were trying to encourage more women, more young professional females into engineering and into STEM subjects. So it was an after school, I believe it was like 3 to 6, and we invited 150 young girls, and I did a session around skills. So we weren't talking about STEM, we were talking about skills. Why? Because your skills and the skills you're building will be really interesting, they will grow over time, but those job titles might not exist. So you have to stop thinking less about job titles and more about the skills that you're using every day and the passions. Then we had a panel at the same time, which was really key, and this is why intersectionality comes into it. We invited their parents. Without the support and the encouragement of your elders, your guardians, your siblings, your teachers, your parents, people, young people, especially women and females who are in education, only know what they know and don't know the rest of it. Parents only know what they know and they don't know the rest of it, right? It was the parents who came and were like, we didn't know that our girls could be in tech, and you've broken that down for us, and now we're going to encourage them to get into that point, because earlier we had all this preconception. Think about media, think about marketing, think about TV. When you think of tech, when you think about engineering, when you think about STEM, who are the figures that come into play? Unfortunately, a lot of them have very similar traits. And so the industry had similar traits. And so when you're trying to go through an educational level, you have to bring their families on board. I come from a Pakistani background. To this day, I'm 32. Any decision we make pretty much as a family. That includes starting my business, that includes traveling, that includes if I have something I'm thinking I will take it to my family. They're not going to say yes or no, but that's how the conversation works. When I entered tech, I remember I was a tech consultant and I had to educate my parents because they are first generation immigrants. They only know what doctor, an accountant, and the cashiers at Barclays. Why? Because those are the people they interact with. Not because they don't know any different, but because those are the people they can see. They don't know what a tech consultant is. They've never met one. They don't see what that looks like, right? So I remember a really good example being is I went in consultancy. My dad goes, oh my God, you're going to stay overnight? Should I come stay with you? Are you going to be safe? Is everything okay? Because that was an education. And now all of my siblings are in tech because it's education. So to your point, what can we all do? We can all go and storytell and break down those misconceptions. That's a you thing, like everyone should be accountable. What can businesses do? We can make sure that when we're having any kind of discussion, it's not a careers day just for these young people. It's a careers day where you are inviting their family members, their guardians, their keepers, their siblings on board, because those are the people that are actually helping them navigate that space in their day-to-day, and they have every right to be there just as much as these young professionals. And I think that's what businesses are missing, And that, honestly, you won't see it overnight. It will be a fundamental shift when we start actually bringing these families involved and saying, we're not gatekeeping, we want you to be part of this journey.
Thanks, Sonya. Great points. I just want to add two things. So first of all, one of the areas of intersectionality we haven't talked about much, but I have sort of lent towards it with menopause is age, and not only the early starters, but also those who are later on in their career, more mature in their career. I think the statistics, and apologise if I get any of these slightly wrong, but I think in 20 years' time, 1/5 of the workforce will be over 50. So already we know that last year not enough children were born to fill all the spaces in 20 years' time, all the jobs that we know that will exist. So not only do we have to think about the young talent, but we also have to think about the older talent and the mature and what they can do and how they can add, because most people can't afford to retire at 55, even 65. It's going to be 75 soon. So what Becky does around tech returners, Kajigo brings women into tech, there's career returners. There's a lot of opportunities that actually, and coming back to the tech numbers, I actually really struggle with this sort of 17% of women in tech. Now and into the future, nearly every job will be tech. It's curiosity. Yes, of course, there's going to be some, but if you use a phone, if you use a computer, if you are a blogger, if you are a journalist, you are using tech. So I think we have to just break down this barrier of that this is only tech, only engineering or STEM, etc. Every role will have a digital or tech element to it, and therefore all of us in some way, if you're in marketing and you work for a tech company, you're a woman in tech, etc., etc. So I think we just actually need to break down a lot of this labeling. It's about curiosity, and we have to instill curiosity in our children. And there is still a lot of stereotypes and biases that we have to overcome, and that a lot of that comes down to, as you said, parents, etc. But I'd love to just break down this whole percentage in tech. Every role, I think, most roles going forward have a digital or tech element to them, and therefore, actually, I think that just breaks open all the percentages.
Yeah, the more that every company is a tech company, the more that we all work in tech. It's very true.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in on your point about stereotypes. I think you're absolutely right, because when you first started talking about girls in code, I can't help but have like this notion in my mind of what that looks like. But exactly to your point, I mean, to be honest now, with whether it's generative AI or the fact that, you know, if you work in art curation, probably the biggest skill you need to have is the ability to sort of socially promote it on social media, you know. And I talk to people all the time, and girls particularly sort of look really nervous when I talk about technology, and I'm like, actually, if you're not curious about this, if you're not using it to empower you, you know, it's this notion of, you know, AI is not going to take my job, somebody using AI is going to take my job. That is 100% correct. And girls really need to feel very comfortable with word technology.
I think we have time for one more question from the audience. And just over here.
Hi, my name is Ikra. I'm British Pakistani, and I studied in South Korea in Seoul National University. I studied computer engineering, and I worked as a full stack developer in a conglomerate in Seoul for around 6 months. And I've come back to London after 3 years, felt a bit homesick. And first of all, I just want to say I'm really enjoying this event. There's not a lot of opportunities for young women like me to hear people like me. I'm British Pakistani too, I'm neurodivergent, and hear the experiences you have and the advice you're giving. It's amazing. What I want to ask is, how can young women like myself break into these roles while facing gender and cultural and neurodivergent biases? I myself, I feel like I have so many life experience, so much experience while I was abroad, while I'm here. But when I do apply for jobs, like even on LinkedIn, I fill in all of the parts where they say if you're a female, what kind of neurodivergent things do you have, things like these, but I never go past the application phase, and I feel like there's so many things that I have about myself to prove myself, but I can never go past that stage. So I was wondering what kind of advice you have for young women like myself, as 5 empowering women on stage right now.
Thank you for your question. I think it's a really great question, and thank you for sharing your background as well. Question I want to ask you is when you do apply, and you said you don't get past the first stage maybe, what's the stage typically that you don't get past? At what stage do you get to before computer says no?
So it's before the interview stage, so it's before the part where I show who I am as a person.
Is it the testing and is it the testing stage, or is it the culture fit stage?
Yeah, it's just
Yeah.
the culture fit stage. So
Yeah.
I fill that in, and then
Okay.
after that I usually don't get
Okay.
a reply.
Yeah, this is the application stage. So a couple of things that I want to say. First of all, when you're applying to any role, I think the really important thing is to think, what skills and competencies do you have that you bring to that role? That's the most important thing. When it comes to neurodivergence, it's not about, I think often people can confuse, and maybe companies too, about the impact of neurodivergence as opposed to the skill set and the competencies. If you're impacted particularly because of neurodivergence, the solution for that is adjustments, and that can be adjustments in recruitment as well. And an adjustment in recruitment people don't often think about is the softer adjustments. People often think of things like extra time or specific things when you're going through an interview. The softer adjustments can be, does your profile look different for whatever reason? Does the way you answer questions around culture fit, is that impacted because of your neurodivergence? What companies aren't allowed to do legally in this country is to ask you if you have a disability or neurodivergence during the recruitment process. It's prohibited under Section 60 of the Equality Act, for example. What they can do and should do is ask you what adjustments you need, but often that term adjustments, people often think of as just extra time for a test or something like that. What they don't think about is maybe the way you're filling out the application form or what you're required to fill out doesn't suit your skill set, or for you to be able to demonstrate or showcase your skill set in the right way, maybe because of your neurodivergence. And so what support and what can be provided to you in order to enable you to do that, so that you're not being at that point screened out of the process. I think the other important bit here is if, for example, somebody was talking about this earlier, AI is being used to screen you out of the process, then that should not be happening, and instead you should be able to contact somebody, a particular person, to say, hey, look, my profile looks different, it's being screened out by the AI, therefore please can somebody else look at this so that that's not automatically being taken out. If you contact me afterwards, I can talk to you about it in more detail, but somebody like you with the skill set you've got that you've described, the experiences you've got, there is going to be a company fit somewhere for you, and I think it's a crying shame if you're being screened out of that process because of AI or some other reason.
Can I just say that you are super brave for even taking the mic and asking that question, and that's what's going to get you noticed. Sometimes when you're different of any kind, the system isn't going to work for you, so you have to make the system work for you. You know what I mean? You have just shared your story with 100 people here. The next step is to make sure they all scan your LinkedIn code to get all their emails and to drop them your CV. The point is that not everything is going to work for everyone. So how are you kind of making the system work for you? You've showed up at an event which you can see competitively your colleagues may not be doing. I would love to see that the fact you showed up on a LinkedIn post. Unfortunately, most of us use LinkedIn in that sense, in terms of like, that's where it needs to be. So you have to be on the platform if you're not already on the platform. You need to see it in your CV, right? Not just your experiences, but extracurricular. Wait to this event, LinkedIn, Computer Weekly, whoever else attended, this is 3 skills I learned. Go and write a blog about it so that people can see that you have the evidence. The second thing, and I'm a big advocate of this, is Sometimes you need people to help you get through the door. So go and find that mentor and that buddy. Again, there are 100 and so people in that room. Go and talk to them, right? Ask them to connect for a coffee. Get to know them. See how you can help them and how they can help you. And after 2 or 3 meets, be like, would you love to take me under your arm? Right? I do this all the time and he hates it, but David right at the front, he is one of those men that I met randomly in a tech event a couple of years ago, not even a couple, maybe like 5. And to this day, if I have a question, I will message him, I'll voice note him, right? For advice, for help, for anything that's in your brain. And then when he thinks of opportunities that might suit me, he'll be like, I'm gonna kind of open the door for you, I'm not gonna do the talking for you, but the system's not gonna work for you. I think outside of that, so you've got showing up for yourself, which you're doing, raising your arm, making yourself aware, I love that. Putting in your CV, putting on LinkedIn, doing content, getting your mentors and buddies. But honestly, and this might feel a little bit like counterintuitive, but I think when you're constantly being rejected or you feel like you're failing, you kind of get into this mode where it feels like maybe it's you, and to some extent it could be, but a lot of the time it's a business's problem. So how do you keep on building those skills, and how do you make sure that the relevant people that are in the room are getting to know the cool things you're doing? And so yes, there's the practical no, absolutely, and I didn't want to touch on that, but I think the fact that you're brave enough to say it and to show up, you're just missing those little pieces, which might be your CV, which might be your LinkedIn barcode, which might be grabbing everyone's email address, which might be following up and saying, look, you're available. And on the side, if you have some time, do some voluntary work or some skill swapping. I started a business in 2020. I did 8 months of skill swapping. That means that I did not get paid for things that I do. It means that I said, you're looking for someone to do that, great. But in return for that, can you give me a testimonial? Can you give me an introduction? Can you give me feedback? Can you give me anything that I could grab onto? And I'm sharing that now because 4 years later, my life has changed through just generally advocating for yourself. And I think that's also what all the panelists are saying now, is if you are intersectional, you're different, or you have this life experience, no one is going to advocate for you the way you advocate for yourself. But you just have to have a little bit of fun with it and make, and kind of play the system.
Talking of having fun, this is a Nash Tech event, right? Yeah. So there's loads of recruitment people here. That's why I was going to leap in. Like, look at their cards, go and pitch yourself. I know it's really hard, but you've got nothing to lose. I also want to let you know that over the last 30 years, I think I've applied on various posts on LinkedIn. I've never got an interview. Okay, I've never got an interview. And I love interviews. I love the kind of sociable element of it, but I've never got that far. So I want you to know it isn't you, it's a system that has thousands. I don't know whether you can see when you apply for these jobs how many people. Usually it tells you, also tells you your performance in the top quartile, bottom. It's really actually quite overwhelming, right? So if you look at the stats, it's not good. Okay, so it's not you, it's the system. It's they're using all these AI filters, but these are real people in the room. Exactly to your point. So use it. You've already done really well.
That's such a great question to end on, and let me just also add, as you do connect with everybody else in this room, be shameless about using the network to open the door for the different listings you see. So if you're applying for a job at ServiceNow, drop me a message, let's connect on LinkedIn. We're always looking for great people, and that is my shameless plug for today. So look, thank you all so much. I could talk to these panelists for hours, I think, but Bryan wouldn't let me do that. We do have to keep to the schedule. So thank you all for joining and for all the great questions today. And with that, I'll pass it back over to Bryan.